but some stuff's ruled out.
Well, I love the way you communicate this because it takes into consideration human nature. And like, I love Dawkins. He's fantastic. I think he's very, very, very valuable. But he likes to call people idiots. And the problem with that is people go, fuck you, you're an idiot. It like is a natural inclination when you insult people to argue back and to sort of dig their heels in.
Yeah.
And you don't do that. And I think that's very important. And I think that a guy like Dawkins just gets frustrated from all these years of debates with people who are uneducated or saying ridiculous things. And he's a bit of a curmudgeon, you know, and he seems to be softening as he's getting older.
Well, he's an evolutionary biologist,
Yes.
and that's the front line in
Yes.
some sense, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You know, I mean, the thing about particle physics is that you don't get a lot of shit because people don't understand what you're talking about. So, yeah, whereas I think evolutionary biology is right there. So I understand his frustration.
Oh, I do too.
I mean, having said that, you know, I've kind of softened a bit over the years, actually, because now I think at this point, both in the US actually and in Britain and in some other countries, we are at a point, you've sort of alluded to it, where everybody's angry. There's a lot of anger, and a lot of it's justified, by the way. I mean, we could talk about that, you know, income inequality and all those things. So there's justified anger. But it seems to me that there are people of goodwill who need to band together to diffuse the anger in our societies. Otherwise, we won't have countries like the United States.
Yes.
There's the United States because it's united and everybody, you've got the American flag there. You know, there's a sense of belonging and identity and togetherness in a country which you've got to preserve. And so I've stopped actually picking. I used to, for example, quite enjoy picking fights with Deepak Chopra on Twitter. You know, and it's just fun.
Me
and it's
too.
a laugh, you know, and you just do it.
Pick
And
some fights with him too.
he says some crazy stuff, and but I've sort of I've stopped doing it. Going, well, but relative to some of the other people,
Right.
He's someone who he means well.
Yes.
I don't agree with virtually anything he says. However, he's a well-meaning person.
Yeah.
And so I've started trying to seek common ground. Now, that's why I for example, gave a talk to the bishops that asked me to come. Yeah, I don't agree with them on the framework, their theological framework, but they mean well, most of them.
Yeah.
So I think seeking consensus and diffusing anger, as you said, it is incumbent on all of us, especially people like us who have a public voice. We need to diffuse some of this anger because otherwise it will consume everyone.
Yes, I've tried very hard to evolve in that respect and just get better at communicating ideas and get better at understanding how people receive those ideas. And I think it's easy to get lazy and to insult and to
and it's fun. And it's funny. It's funny, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially me. I mean, I'm a comedian. It's part of what I do is insult people.
Yeah,
but I do it
funny.
for humor. I want to entertain people. That's the whole idea behind it. But I think in terms of like discussing ideas, especially that are so personal to people, like religion, I've re-examined the way I interpret these ideas and the way I talk about these things.
Yeah. It's interesting. I did a BBC program ages ago. I was asked to do it on this thing called the Wreath Lectures at the BBC that the BBC have done since 1952, I think it was, and Robert Oppenheimer did them in 1953. And it's fascinating. You can get the transcripts online; they're free, and you can get one recording of the 5. They taped over the other 4. Can you believe it?
Wow!
So they erased them because they wanted the tape for something else.
No,
it's just unbelievable. But one of them exists of Oppenheimer giving these lectures.
Oh my God! How could they do
that? I know, but you can read it. It's just
they taped over. Can you buy more tapes?
And Bertrand Russell did them. They taped over them.
They taped over Bertrand Russell's.
I know.
Oh my God!
It's just bizarre. Because tape was so expensive. But he talks...
That's crazy.
Yeah. But it's brilliant. It's called Science and the Common Understanding. And they weren't very well received because they thought he was going to talk about the Manhattan Project. So they thought he was going to talk about the atom bomb, you know, because he ran it, basically. But he didn't. He talked about how thinking like a scientist, which means thinking in the way that nature forces you to think, can be valuable in other areas. And that's an insight in itself. The great thing, the unique thing about science is nature forces you to think like that. You can't have an opinion. You can't have an opinion about gravity, right? If you jump off a building, you're going to hit the ground. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what your opinion is. And he said, so if you think about, for example, quantum mechanics, so sometimes you think of a particle like an electron. Sometimes it's a point-like object. It behaves like a little billiard ball thing, a pool ball that bounces around. But sometimes it behaves like an extended thing, like a wavy thing. And nature forces you to hold both ideas in your head at the same time in order to get a complete picture of the object, a description of an electron. And he said that's the valuable thing about quantum mechanics. Unless you're doing electronics or inventing lasers, you don't need to know this stuff. But if you want to learn how to think, it's valuable to be forced to hold different ideas in your head at the same time. It's really teaching you not to be an absolutist. It's really teaching you. The example he uses is because I think he had problems with McCarthy and all those things, didn't he? So you think he's writing in the 50s. So he said you can be a communist, which in his definition would be that you think the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, right? So society is all that matters. Or you could be a libertarian, right, on the far conservative end, where you think that the individual is the only thing that matters, and that's it. But actually, of course, to have a functioning society, you need a mixture of the two. And we can weight it one way or the other, but you need to hold both ideas in your head at the same time. And he said that's one of the most valuable things about science, because it forces you into modes of thought that are valuable. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about absolute positions are always just a blinkered sort of subset of what's actually happening. You can't understand the world by being an extremist.
Yeah.
You've got to hold all these views in your head.
Well, that I find that so often on this podcast, because I talk with people I agree with and disagree with, and I always try to put myself in the head of the person that I disagree with. I always try to figure out how they're coming to those conclusions or where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to not be married to ideas. Like, I had a conversation with someone about this, and they said, like, sometimes you change your opinions a lot. I go, yeah, I do. I do.
As if it's a bad thing.
Like I'm flip-flopping. I'm not a politician. Like, I'm not flip-flopping. I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like, I will have one opinion on a thing, whether it's a controversial thing like universal basic income. I'll change my mind 100% in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll go, no. Now I think it's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
And then I'll go back and forth. No. People need it's as cruel as it seems. They need motivation. And I don't know. I bounce around with these things.
Yeah.
But I've tried really hard as I've gotten older to have less absolute opinions.
Yeah. Yeah, Richard Feynman, another great physicist, wrote a similar essay at a similar time to Oppenheimer. And he also worked on the Manhattan Project. And it's called The Value of Science. And I think that was 1955. And they both shared, actually, a surprise, I think, that they were still alive. Because they thought that the power they'd given to the politicians, the atom bomb, would destroy everything. They didn't think that the political system would control it, and it did. So that's an remarkable thing.
Yeah.
We're still here. But in that essay, he said that the most valuable thing about science is the realization that we don't know. And he said in that statement, he calls science a satisfactory philosophy of ignorance, by the way. Wow. And he said in that statement is the open door, the open channel, he called it. So if we want to make progress, we have to understand that we don't know everything, and we have to leave things to future generations, and we can be uncertain and we can change our minds. And he said that it's a great last line. I can't remember exactly what he says, but he said it's something like, it's our duty as scientists to communicate the value of uncertainty and the value of freedom of thought to all future generations. That's the point. That's what freedom of thought means. Freedom of thought means the freedom to change your mind. And in fact, said that's what democracy is, if you think about it. Democracy is a trial and error system. So it's the admission that we don't know how to do it. Therefore, we'll change. Every 4 years, we'll change the president, or every 8 years, we'll change the president. Why? Because the president doesn't know how to do it. So someone better. There will be someone better that comes along, and then someone worse and someone better. Yeah. But it's a trial and error system. And he's right. And he's right that is the open door. That's the road to progress.
It's certainly better than
humility.
Yeah. One of the things that I love so much about Bertrand Russell and about Feynman was how human they were. They were very human. I mean, Feynman liked to play the bongos, and he was chasing girls, and Bertrand Russell was addicted to tobacco. He would talk about how he wouldn't fly unless he could smoke. Like he had to get us, was back when they had smoking sections on airplanes, and he had his pipe, and he just refused to fly without tobacco. He couldn't imagine being without tobacco. I'm like, that's so strange for such a brilliant guy to be addicted to such a gross thing.
Yeah, you're right, because I think these are people that found existence joyous, right? They
Yes.
wanted to know. They just wanted to know stuff.
Yeah.
They didn't want to know everything, because you can't know everything.
Right.
I suppose that's what, if you think about what the job of a scientist is, it's to stand on the edge of the known, because you're a research scientist. So if there's nothing to know, then you've got no job.
Right.
So you have to be naturally comfortable with not knowing. And if there's one thing I really do think, how do we begin to patch our countries back up again? One of the reasons, I think, in education is to teach people the value of uncertainty, of not knowing. It is not weak to not know. It's actually natural not to know.
And that's
not
one
be
of the
afraid
problems
of it.
with religion, is to say that you know when you do not, or to say that you have absolute truth and absolute knowledge of something
Yeah.
when it can't really exist.